And I think in terms,
Thank you so much. I'd like to ask the interpreter currently on the Spanish channel to commence translation of the meeting. Live translation can be heard on the Spanish channel. To join the Spanish channel, click on the interpretation icon on your Zoom toolbar. It looks like a globe. Once you have joined the Spanish channel, we recommend you shut off the main audio so you can clearly hear the Spanish translation. And I'll allow our translator on this English side to go ahead and translate that.
Muy buenas tardes. Nuestra presentación está a punto de comenzar. Si usted habla español y quiere escuchar la transmisión en español, por favor, váyase al icono donde dice Spanish o español, presione y lo va a desconectar de la transmisión directa y va a pasar a la transmisión en español. Gracias.
Thank you, Mario. I'll now move you to the Spanish channel to commence translating, and we'll go ahead and start the meeting.
Great. Well, good evening and welcome to the 4th community meeting for the City of Santa Rosa's Water Supply Alternatives Plan, which is focused on exploring Santa Rosa's water future and increasing the city's water supply resiliency and reliability. I'm Mark Milan with Data Instincts, and I'll be moderating and facilitating tonight's community meeting. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. As a reminder, tonight's presenters, panelists, and members of the public, please speak slower and very clearly to ensure the interpreters can convey all of tonight's content in Spanish. I'd like to introduce Esther Ledesma, who will provide additional information about how to participate in tonight's meeting. Esther?
Thank you, Mark. As community members join the meeting, you will be participating as an attendee. Your microphone and camera will be muted. Only today's panelists will be viewed during the meeting. The City of Santa Rosa is committed to creating a safe and inclusive environment free from disruption. Hateful speech or actions won't be tolerated. Everyone is expected to participate respectfully or they will be removed. If necessary, we will also immediately end the meeting. This meeting is being recorded and will be placed on the city website following the meeting. At the end of the presentation, Mark will open up the meeting for public questions and comments.
Thank you, Esther. And once again, I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. Your participation and input are important to the city as we discuss Santa Rosa's water future. This is our 4th community meeting on this topic. Links to the video recordings and presentation slides from previous meetings are available on Santa Rosa's Our Water Future webpage at srcity.org/ourwaterfuture. In the past meeting section, that's where you'll find it. Tonight, we're focused on the draft water supply alternatives plan. To start us off, we'll have opening comments by Santa Rosa Water Deputy Director Peter Martin. And after that, we'll provide an overview of the agenda and topics we plan to cover. Deputy Director Martin?
Great, thanks for the introduction, Mark. We'll just start with some brief opening comments here. Just good evening to everyone. Welcome, and I thank you all for being here tonight. We appreciate that you've taken the time to attend and participate in our 4th community meeting to discuss the Our Water Future project. As you're aware, our current water supply condition is back to normal this year, and that's really good news. However, we've had 3 local droughts in less than 20 years, and climate change models predict we're likely to continue to see frequent and perhaps even more severe droughts in the future. We also want to be prepared for sudden emergencies that could cause water shortages due to earthquakes or other disasters. And so with this in mind, Santa Rosa is considering the best options for expanding and diversifying our drinking water supply to serve our community in the future. As Mark mentioned, over the past 9 months, we've held 3 community meetings to get your input on Our Water Future. And to date, we've had about 70 people that have directly participated and influenced and discussed shaping our water future. This includes Santa Rosa Water staff, leaders of the local community organizations and resource agencies, our Board of Public Utilities, and of course, you, our community. Together, all these stakeholders have helped to accomplish several things. We've defined the water supply resiliency goals, created a list of potential new water sources to study, identified the criteria for ranking them, reviewed and revised the feasibility study results, and refined water supply portfolios. So the mixes of the water supplies to help us to achieve our goals. We're grateful to everyone who has taken time to contribute to this important effort. And tonight, we're excited to share the draft water supply alternatives plan with you. The draft plan really brings this all together, all the work completed so far, and lays out an adaptive strategy for achieving the water supply goals. We are looking forward to your input. And we'll, of course, allow plenty of time for your questions and comments, and we'll respond whenever possible. Plus, we'll carefully consider your comments as we finalize our plan. So thank you again for attending, and thank you in advance for participating in the discussion. We look forward to your questions and feedback. And with that, I'm going to hand this back over to Mark to introduce our first presenter.
Great. Thank you, Deputy Director Martin. This evening, we'll provide an update on the project progress and share the draft water supply alternatives plan with you. During the presentation, we will pause at key points to allow opportunities for you to ask the panel questions, make comments, offer any ideas that you may have. And after the presentations, there will be another opportunity for community input, so not to worry. The presenters include the following staff from Santa Rosa Water: Colin Close, Senior Water Resources Planner; Katie Cole, Planner for Woodard and Curran. And in addition, we have other project team members and city staff available to answer questions as needed. Tonight's agenda includes background information, project update of what's been accomplished so far, review of the draft water supply alternatives plan, and further explanation of water supply portfolios, which is mixes of water supply options that could be achieved, that can achieve the water supply resiliency goals. And of course, what are next steps? As I mentioned previously, you will have opportunities to provide input at various points during and after the presentation. We welcome your questions, comments, and suggestions. And to allow as many participants to speak as possible, each person will be limited to 2 minutes. If there is time remaining after everyone has had a chance to contribute, then it's possible you'll have an additional opportunity to comment again if you wish. I would now like to introduce Colin Close, the city's Senior Water Resources Planner and Project Manager for this effort. Colin will present a brief bit of background information, and following his presentation, Katie Cole from Woodard and Curran's team will present the project progress, and then the draft plan and the portfolios of water supply options. And with that, Colin?
Thanks so much, Mark, and good evening, everybody. We're so happy that you're here with us, joining us tonight. So let me cover a little bit of background information. If you have joined us in the past, you'll have seen these slides before. So if you don't mind being patient with us, we just want to make sure that folks have the same background information. So this is a repeat, but it's, I think, interesting and useful information. City of Santa Rosa has about 176,000 residents in our urban setting here. We serve about 6.3 billion gallons of water per year for these urban customers. We don't serve drinking water to agriculture. We do provide some recycled water, but not drinking water. We have 3 water sources. I'll explain those in just a moment. And inside the city, we have 23 reservoirs. These are large steel tanks that are above ground. Water is delivered to all of our customers through about 600 miles of pipe. And that drinking water pipe is predominantly under our streets. You drive over it every day without realizing it. We also have about 600 miles of sanitary sewer pipe that takes wastewater from homes and businesses, and it sends it to the west side where we have a treatment plant that recycles that water. We also recycle wastewater from Rohnert Park, Cotati, Sebastopol, and the Southwest Sanitation District that's inside of Santa Rosa, a little area. So altogether, we recycle about 7 billion gallons of water every year. And again, that can be used for a little bit for the urban setting for landscape. It's also used by farmers. And it's also sent to the geysers where Calpine pumps that water deep underground, and it encounters very hot rock and turns into steam. They capture that steam and use it for electricity. They convert that steam energy to electrical energy. So our 3 water sources inside of Santa Rosa, what we're serving our customers, includes 2 drinking water sources and 1 non-potable or non-drinking water source. So we have almost 9.5 billion gallons of water available from Sonoma Water. Sonoma Water gets most of its water from the Russian River system. We also have city wells inside of Santa Rosa that we use for drinking water. And we have about 30 sites that get recycled water for landscape irrigation. So altogether, there's almost 10.3 billion gallons of water available to us each year, but we don't use that much. And I'll show you how much we do use on average with the next slide. So this shows you how much water we used in 2020. This was before we declared drought, so it was what we would call a normal water use year, where we were not telling customers to cut back. Just normal circumstances, 6.3 billion gallons of water. You can see that most of that water gets used by folks at home. It's used for cooking and cleaning and for landscapes. And then some of that water, about almost 1/4 of our water, is used by businesses, institutions like schools and governments and churches, industries, and then any irrigation that they have associated with their property. And then there's a little bit of water that we use to maintain our water system. We flush main pipes to keep them clean. We test fire hydrants. We do water quality testing. And we have leaks in our system that we repair from time to time. So these kinds of water use, and also firefighting, these water uses don't earn money, but they're important to keep track of, because when we plan for the future, we need to plan for water for our residents and businesses and other institutions, and for these other non-revenue uses. When you look at where the water came from, 93% came from Sonoma Water. And if you remember, I explained Sonoma Water predominantly gets its water from the Russian River. About 95% of its water comes from the Russian River. So most of our water comes from one water provider, and most of their water comes from one water source. So this is one of the reasons we feel it's important to expand the sources of water that we have for our use in Santa Rosa. Our drinking water wells provide about 6 to 7% of our water, and then less than 1% is recycled water for landscape use. recycled water that is not drinking water quality, just treated to the extent where it can be used for just about everything except drinking water. It's very safe water, but it doesn't meet all drinking water standards. So how does that compare to use over the past 30 years or so? This chart shows you the total amount of water that our community used, including that non-revenue water, every year back to 1990, all the way through 2022. When we compare 2020 to 1990, you can see we used less water in 2020. In fact, 14% less. But we had 57% more people living in Santa Rosa. If you look at 2004, that year was the highest water use year in Santa Rosa on record. And in 2020, we used 20% less water than we did in 2004. So this is very good news that water use has gone down, even though population increased. So in average rainfall years, we have plenty of water to meet all of the needs of our growing community. But when we have drought, as you have seen recently, especially when it lasts 2 or 3 years, we need to ask our community to cut back their water use. Climate change models anticipate we're going to see drought occur potentially more frequently or potentially worse than we've seen in the past. And we want to be prepared. This chart shows just how severe the last drought was. The green line shows the average amount of water stored in Lake Sonoma. That's the main source of drinking water for the Russian River system. So it shows how much was stored on average each month. The blue line shows the actual water use that we saw from 2019 to 2022. The dotted black line shows the lowest storage in the lake up until this last drought. And the red line shows is a sort of a warning line. If storage in the lake goes below that red line, 100,000 acre feet, and the rainy season is done, the state can require that Sonoma Water deliver 30% less water than normal. So you can see the blue line shows that we've been below the 30-year average storage. We were below that for almost 3 years. And we were below the lowest month storage for almost 2 years. So this last drought was very severe, was the second driest period on record for our area. We hope we don't see drought this severe in the near future, but we do think drought will occur more frequently than it used to, and that we could see drought this severe again. If we had a severe shortage where storage in Lake Sonoma went below that red dotted line and stayed there after the rainy season, Sonoma Water could be required to deliver 30% less water than normal. If Santa Rosa had a 30% shortage in its water supply, we would likely have to ration water among our customers. We've never had to ration water before. We've had water shortages where we asked people to conserve water, but we've never had to ration water. So a 30% shortage would be very significant and could have tremendous impacts on our residents and our businesses and our schools and our parks. So again, this is of concern to us. We started this project, the Water Supply Alternatives Plan project, last year. We wanted to find a way to expand our water supply so we would have more reliability. Not only, though, for climate change and drought, but also in case we had a sudden catastrophic event, a sudden emergency, and needed to provide water without any water from Sonoma Water, if they had something happen to their pipes or their pumps or their system in some way. The way we went about this was to do a study of a wide range of water supply options to help us identify which ones make the most sense for Santa Rosa at this time. When we started this project, we started with 5 questions as staff members and managers and operators of our water system. And these are the 5 questions that have guided all the work we've done so far. The first 3 questions were addressed by doing the study. And we'll talk tonight about some of the answers that we gained from doing that study. How much water is enough? New water supply is expensive. How do we balance the more water versus cost? What supply options should we study? You'll see we ended up looking at 18 different water supply options. How do we assess them? How do we compare them to each other? How do we figure out which ones are a good fit for Santa Rosa? Those were the study questions. And then we wanted to know what mixes of feasible water supply options would help us achieve our goal. And we think in the future that things could change dramatically. Technology could change. Funding sources could change. Regulations and laws could change. So we wanted different alternative portfolios in case we needed to change course over time. And then the last question was, what's the best way forward? How should we develop some sort of adaptive path that lets us move towards achieving our goals? So to start the project, we hired Woodard & Curran after an extensive search and competitive process. And the main areas of work that they have helped us with include engaging stakeholders. It's a lot of different folks that we've asked to help us think through this problem and come up with solutions. We also asked them to help us set objectives. What's the right water supply goal? What are the right options to study? How do we study those? These were developed with input from all the stakeholders, plus the expertise and guidance of Woodard & Curran. And then we wanted them to conduct the study and help us identify which options were feasible and how those options could be put together in different mixes or different portfolios, and then develop a long-term plan for achieving those goals. So tonight we're showing you a very early draft of the water supply plan. We've gotten input from a range of different stakeholders about this plan, and now we're asking you. Once we have all that input together, we'll revise the draft plan and take it to the governing bodies, the decision makers, and ask them to accept this as the path forward. Involved, in addition to all of the community members who have participated in this by attending these webinars, we also have our water team. Our director of the water department, Jennifer Burke, all of our deputy directors, and their key staff. So this is a team that has lots of expertise and information in lots of different areas. And they've all been at the table working with us on this effort. In addition, we had a stakeholder group of leaders of organizations across Santa Rosa. There were folks from business and economic interests, like chambers of commerce and developers. We had community and service organizations. We had regional recycled water users. We had environmental and climate interests. And we had local resource agencies sitting around the table with us all together, talking to each other and talking to us to help us look at the goals, the options, the feasibility study. All of these pieces were benefited from all of the stakeholder input. So now what I want to do is turn this over to Katie Cole. Katie's the project manager for Woodard and Curran, and she's going to give you a project update. So Katie, if I could, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you.
Super, thanks, Colin. Good evening, everyone. As Colin said, I'm Katie Cole. I'm the project manager for the Water Supply Alternatives Plan. We'll start off tonight with just a quick project update. Next slide, please. So this graphic that you see on your screen is an overall look at the timeline of our project. We've broken it up into 4 key phases that are generally represented by the 4 circles that you see on the screen. In the fall, we began with establishing the planning foundation. So those are things like our water supply goals, the criteria that we would use to assess the supply options, the methodology or how we would go about applying that criteria, and then what supply options we would be looking at. We reviewed those items with you, the community, during our first 2 community workshops back in last October and then earlier this year in January. That information was used to conduct the feasibility analysis, which greatly informed the development of the draft plan that we'll review with you tonight. We'll continue to work through the fall of this year to bring that plan to both the Board of Public Utilities and the Santa Rosa City Council. Next slide, please. Since we kicked the project off last year, we've been quite busy. We've had a number of meetings, including 5 working sessions with the water team. That's that internal group of city staff that Colin had mentioned. We have had 3 community meetings thus far, this being our 4th and final. And then we've also had 4 stakeholder group meetings. That's the group of folks that we've compiled from various organizations throughout Santa Rosa. Woodard and Curran, my team, used those comments and the information that was gathered at each of those meetings to inform the plan that we'll present to you tonight. So I think now we'll talk about the different elements of the plan. But before we do, Mark, I want to see if there's any questions or comments for either Colin or myself.
Great, thank you, Katie. We'd like to hear from our participants now, based on the information you've heard so far. But before we do that, I would like to ask Easter to review how you can participate. Easter?
Yes, thank you, Mark. Anyone wishing to ask a question, make a comment, or offer ideas can raise their hand in Zoom. Individuals participating in the meeting by telephone can dial *9 to raise their hand. We ask those listening on the Spanish channel but wishing to make a public comment to turn off leave interpretation entirely at the time you hear your name called, so you join the main channel to make your public comment heard and translated into English. The icon may now look like a circle with an ES in the middle and the word Spanish underneath. You can then rejoin the Spanish channel at the conclusion of our comment to continue listening to Spanish. We will then call on community participants one by one who have their Zoom hand raised. When it's your turn to speak, your microphone will be unmuted. Once you have asked your question or shared your input, your hand will be lowered and your microphone muted, so our panelists may respond to your question or comments. To allow as many community participants as possible, each person wishing to speak will be limited to 2 minutes. If we still have time after everyone has had the chance to contribute, then you are welcome to raise your hand again and speak for a second time.
Great. Easter, are we ready for the first commenter or person who may have a question?
I do not see any hands raised in Zoom.
All right, so seeing none, Katie, do you want to continue?
Sure. All right, so now I'm going to be walking through each section of the draft water supply alternatives plan that we've been developing over the last several months. The plan itself is divided into 6 chapters, starting with the introduction, chapter 2, approach to developing the water supply alternatives plan. So going over the criteria and methodology. Water supply options is chapter 3, what options we did look at. Chapter 4 is a pretty hefty chapter. It goes over the analysis of the water supply options. Chapter 5 covers portfolios, and then our final chapter 6 highlights some next steps that the city could take. So I'll be walking through each of these in the next few slides. Chapter 1 presents the background, purpose, and then also outlines how the document is organized. So it has much of the same information that Colin presented just at the beginning of our meeting here tonight. It includes background information about the city's water forecast, and highlights that the purpose of the plan is to, as Colin mentioned, really prepare for potential future supply reductions or catastrophic interruptions. Some key takeaways from this chapter include that Santa Rosa currently depends upon Sonoma Water for 93% of its annual potable water supply, as Colin mentioned, really putting the city at risk for water shortage in the event of drought or those severe shortages. Next slide, please. Chapter 2 covers the approach, or really how the water supply alternatives plan was developed, including the water supply goals and the analysis methodology. As I mentioned, this chapter includes the goals of the plan, which include kind of in broad terms, mitigating droughts, mitigating natural disasters and catastrophic events, and mitigating peak day demand. So first, in order to mitigate the effects of prolonged drought, the city should be able to meet 30% of its potable water demand with local sources by 2045. The volume of that water is roughly 7,500 acre feet per year. And an acre foot is roughly the number of gallons that it would take to fill a football size field with 1 foot deep of water. So it's just over 325,000 gallons. The second goal states that the city should provide 50% of average indoor potable water demand from local water sources to mitigate the impacts of natural disasters and other potential catastrophic interruptions of service from Sonoma Water. Based on current demand projections, we're estimating that this is about 9 million gallons per day by 2045. The third goal is that the city should meet 30% of demand on an average day in the highest use month. So this volume was also around 9 million gallons per day by 2045. Next slide, please. So with these overarching goals established, the city implemented a process to assess the feasibility of the supply options it would be looking at. So this three-step process included a pre-screening analysis. That's the first green circle you see there, which was really designed to eliminate projects that were infeasible or really substantially similar to other proposed or existing city projects. The remaining options then underwent a screening analysis, which really developed high-level assessments of the supply options around their cost effectiveness and their scalability. Scalability is a term that refers to the ability of a supply option to provide either more or less water in the future than it could provide today. So if you think about, turning a knob, that would get you more or less water. The screening tool that was used helped provide and determine the kind of conceptual performance of each supply option in areas such as water yield, so how much water would be available, how much it would cost, capital costs, operation and maintenance costs, and removed or helped us remove options that were not cost effective at this time. Finally, the detailed feasibility analysis involved scoring the final supply options on 8 evaluation criteria. These were cost effectiveness, scalability, resiliency, equity, environmental performance, regulatory, so how well or how easy or difficult that option would be to get permitted or work through regulatory channels. The seventh evaluation criteria around city control and interagency coordination, and then whether or not that option provided multiple benefits. Next slide, please. Chapter 3 is a brief overview and description of the 18 supply options that this plan considered. So this table goes through all 18 of them. There are 6 categories, if you will, of water supply options: groundwater, purified recycled water, recycled water, so it's purple pipe recycled water, non-drinkable, desalination, stormwater, and efficiency programs. The supply options really included covered a wide range of elements. They included both local and regional options. And the list really reflected feedback that we have received from you all during our community meetings, as well as the water team and stakeholder group. Next slide, please. Chapter 4 includes the results of the analysis, including the pre-screening outcome, as well as the results from both our screening and feasibility analyses. As I mentioned prior, the input that we received from all of you went into these supply options from the water team, stakeholder group, as well as the Board of Public Utilities, and you all, our community. Next slide, please. So during our pre-screening, 5 options were set aside and did not move forward. Regional groundwater and stormwater options, those are GW4, GW5, and SW3, so the first 2 options and the last option, were removed because they overlap substantially with other proposed supply options, so they didn't need to undergo a separate analysis. Additionally, Santa Rosa is already slated to participate in regional groundwater and stormwater projects via the Groundwater Sustainability Agency and the Sonoma Water System for stormwater. Likewise, PR3B and SW2, those are the 2 middle options, were removed from further study because Lake Ralphine, which is a part of those options, is not large enough to make that supply option cost effective. Next slide, please. So moving on to the outcome of the screening process, a further 6 supply options were removed that you see on the screen here, largely for reasons of cost effectiveness. The purified recycled water options and both desalination options proved to be somewhat expensive given the current technology, of course, recognizing that technology could change in the future. Likewise, the recycled water option was removed because it does not provide Santa Rosa with potable water to meet its goals. So that would just be expanding a non-drinking water system. Next slide, please. So of the original 18 supply options, 7 were ultimately scored as part of the feasibility analysis. This slide shows the outcome of that process. For each criterion, so listed on the left, options were scored between 0 and 2, with 2 being most favorable. I do want to draw your attention to the bottom 2 rows. So the first there, the total unweighted. To calculate that row, the raw score for each criterion was added together. And then to arrive at the weighted score at the bottom, the raw score was multiplied by the criterion weight that was assigned to each criterion. So the analysis and what you see here could really reflect the priorities about the relative importance of each of the criteria. Chapter 5 outlines the 4 portfolios that were developed. So we'll get into these on the next few slides. So each of the 4 portfolios centered around a specific theme. Portfolio 1 is centered around economics. So what could be done most efficiently from an economic perspective? Included in that portfolio is converting emergency wells to full-time production wells and expanding the water use efficiency programs of the city. Portfolio 2 includes 3 options that could be implemented the fastest. Those are the 2 options that are included in Portfolio 1, with the addition of adding additional extraction wells. Portfolio 3 aims to maximize the amount of water and includes the same options as Portfolio 2, with the addition of constructing a direct potable reuse facility, that's PR2, and potentially capturing stormwater in the groundwater aquifer. The final portfolio is the most adaptive of the 4 and allows the city to consider multiple options before making a final determination about which path forward to take. So now in the upcoming slides, we'll get into how each of these portfolios perform. Next slide, please. So this table shows the water yield and costs for each of the 4 portfolios. The first 2 columns are about water yield. Water capacity, the first column is the potential range of water that the portfolio could provide. The second column, which is estimated yield, is a more realistic estimate of the amount of water that the portfolio could provide, given certain operating assumptions for each of the supply options that are in that portfolio. So that's the difference between those 2 columns. Capital costs, the third column, are construction-related costs, how much it would take to build that portfolio, and then annual O&M or operation and maintenance costs are what it would cost to operate and maintain the supply options in that portfolio. Next slide, please. Because the theme for Portfolio 1 is most economical, this portfolio has the least capital and operation and maintenance costs of the 4 portfolios. It also yields the least amount of water of the 4 portfolios. So to orient you to the graph, the blue band is the range of water capacity. So represents the first column on that prior slide that we just saw, the range of potential supply. The dark blue dashed line is the estimated acre feet per year, so estimated water yield based on certain operating assumptions. The red line, which is just under that dashed blue line, is the capital costs associated with the portfolio. And then the yellow line there at the bottom is operating burden, so essentially the operation and maintenance associated with the portfolio. So this slide shows an implementation concept for the portfolio. Both E1 and GW2, the options would begin concurrently. Water efficiency could be phased, and GW2 would begin with technical studies and environmental documentation. CEQA stands for the California Environmental Quality Act. The orange dots on these implementation timelines represent certain decision points that the city could use to determine how to move forward. Next slide, please. So now we will cover Portfolio 2, which has to do with implementation speed. This is the cost and yield graph for Portfolio 2. So you'll see here the blue range, again, more significant than it was in Portfolio 1. And the dashed blue line, the estimate of the yield for the portfolio, more significant capital costs, construction costs on the red line, and operating costs again on the yellow line at the bottom. So the implementation concept for portfolio 2 is quite similar to portfolio 1. Both E1 and GW2 would begin concurrently. And again, because this portfolio is about implementation speed, GW1, the new supply option in this portfolio, would also begin with siting studies to determine where those new extraction wells could be placed. So now we'll get into portfolio 3, which builds on portfolio 2 by adding PR2 and includes considering stormwater storage in the groundwater aquifer. So because this portfolio includes constructing and operating a potable reuse facility, you'll see costs are much higher than the prior 2 portfolios, but water yield is also considerably higher as well, roughly 35,000 acre feet per year compared to portfolio 2, which was about 15,000 acre feet. Next slide, please. So since portfolio 3 involves 5 different supply options, the implementation concept that you see here is a little bit more crowded, but we'll walk through this. E1, GW2, and GW1 are all moving concurrently forward, similar to portfolio 2. Because this portfolio's theme is really around maximizing water, PR2 would begin right away with planning studies, followed by environmental documentation. That's the CEQA you see there. And then the regulatory permitting process before it would move into design and construction. Likewise, SW1 would begin right away with planning studies and modeling. At this point, SW1 would pause while the other options advance. And the benefit really of pausing here is that further work on that water supply option on SW1 could be informed by the performance or how much water yield the other options would ultimately provide. We can click once. So once those other options are implemented, if the city determines that additional water is still needed, then they could move forward with the design, construction, and operation of SW1. Next slide, please. So portfolio 4 is the most adaptive of our portfolios, which is certainly hinted at by the number of options that the city would consider in this portfolio. Next slide, please. So this slide shows a baseline scenario for portfolio 4 where all of the supply options, even the ones that were marked considered or consider, would be implemented. So what that means is that portfolio 4 is quite similar to portfolio 3 in that both are have pretty high costs and estimated yields. In total, capital costs for this portfolio are around $650 million, and estimated water yield is about 35,000 acre feet per year. Next slide, please. So sticking with our baseline for portfolio 4, this slide shows the implementation concept. E1 and GW2 will proceed the same way as they have across all the other portfolios. GW1, which is in the middle, would begin siting studies for those extraction wells. So again, where could we put those wells? It's labeled GW1 plus because during those siting studies, there would be an additional focus on sites with the potential for injection and extraction. So putting water into the groundwater basin and taking water out. Work on this option on GW1 plus would pause while E1 and GW2 advance. SW1 would begin with planning studies and modeling to determine if there's stormwater that could be used for injection as part of GW1 plus. That's why you see the green arrow connecting upward to GW1 plus. Work on PR2 plus wouldn't start right away. It would pause as additional regulations in the state of California are being worked on, so we can better understand what that may look like. The plus sign there, PR2 plus, is to denote that there may be possibility for a regional facility. So once E1 and GW2 are fully operational, the city will know at that point if and how much additional supply is needed. We can click once. Colin, can you click once? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So if at that
my apology, Katie, I just was getting a word that if we can all slow down just a little bit,
Sure.
because this is so technical, the interpreters do want to do their best. And so if we can take just a little bit more time between sentences, that'd be super helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for that feedback. So if after E1 and GW2, there we go. So if after E1 and GW2 are fully operational, at that point, they'll know whether or not additional supply is needed. If at that point it's determined that additional supply is needed, the city would continue working on GW1 plus while starting planning studies for PR2 for PR2 plus. That's the solid blue line there that you see at the beginning under PR2 plus. Work on PR2 plus would then pause after those initial planning studies. That's denoted by the dashed line, the dashed blue line out into the future. SW1 would also pause after those initial planning studies and modeling. Once GW1 is underway, so that's the solid gray line that you see at the end of GW1 plus, the city will be able to continue work on SW1. So Colin, if you could click once, that'll show that information from GW1 plus feeds back into SW1. And at that point, the city would design and construct stormwater facilities that could be used to supply water to GW1 plus to inject into the groundwater basin. If there at that point is still need for additional water, Colin, if you could click once, then PR2 could move forward and be sized appropriately based on the remaining need for water. So because this portfolio is designed to be adaptive, there are other implementation pathways that the city can consider. So for example, what would happen, what would implementation look like if GW1 is able to provide enough water to meet the city's supply goals? So let's walk through that. Next slide, please. So just like our baseline scenario, the implementation concept starts out the same. So we work on E1, GW2, GW1 plus, and SW1. GW1 work is paused after the initial siting studies, while E1 and GW2 advance. At this point, Colin, you can click once. The city understands how much additional water is needed from GW1 to meet supply goals, and work on that project can continue. PR2 plus and SW1 do not move past their initial planning studies because GW1 is able to provide the remaining water that is needed. So unlike our baseline scenario, our alternative scenario only involves the construction of the first 3 options. It would not involve construction of PR2 and SW1. Next slide, please. This slide shows the cost and yield performance for this alternative scenario. Again, because not all elements of this portfolio are ultimately implemented, the cost and yield numbers are more reflective of what would be needed to meet the city's supply goals. So for example, in that portfolio, water from SW1 is not needed. But what would happen if SW1 is able to provide some water that could be used to inject in the groundwater basin? So as with the 2 prior scenarios, baseline and alternatives, GW1 plus would continue after the yields for E1 and GW2 are understood. But in this case, Colin, if you can click once, water from SW1 could be used in GW1 plus. So work on SW1 would continue through the design and construction phases. PR2 would not move forward because the city's water supply goals would already be met with GW1 plus and SW1, in addition to E1 and GW2 at the top. But what would happen if GW1 plus is not able to provide enough water? Let's walk through that next. So in this case, SW1 would not be able to provide water to GW1. So because additional water would still be needed after GW1 is implemented, the city would continue work on PR2 plus. Next slide, please. So that gets us through each of our portfolios, in addition to the baseline and alternative of portfolio 4, plus those 2 variants we just walked through. This is a side-by-side comparison of all of the portfolios we just covered. All of the graphs are on the same scale, so you can see across the portfolios how each performs. Next slide, please. So chapter 6, next steps, proposes some next steps that the city could take to advance water supply planning.
Hey, Katie, how
Yes.
about we take a break for a minute and see if there are any questions from our participants?
Absolutely.
Is that all right? Okay,
Yeah.
great. So Easter, do we have any hands up for comments or questions? I know we covered a lot of material there. So
We do not have any hands raised, but just as a reminder, if you're wanting to ask a question or make a comment or offer ideas, you can raise your hand in Zoom. And if you're participating by telephone, you can dial 9 to raise your hand. And it does not look, we do not have any raised hands at this time.
none at all? Okay, great. I just thought we'd take a pause there for a second. Thank you, Katie.
No, thank you, Mark. So now we'll go into chapter 6, which is the final chapter of the plan that goes over next steps that the city could take to advance water supply planning. This slide generally shows the first 5 steps that the city could take. Begins with identifying potential funding sources for supply options with large planning and construction costs. Second step, the city could begin planning for enhanced water efficiency programs. So really beginning work on that E1 option that we've been talking about. Step 3, the city could also begin technical studies related to reclassifying or converting its emergency wells into full-time production wells. This supply option is also in all 4 of the portfolios. Once that work is underway, the city could move on to step 4, which would be preparing siting studies to determine the most appropriate locations for new groundwater wells, which may include wells with the capacity or the capability to pump water into and out of the groundwater basin. That's denoted by ASR, which stands for Aquifer Storage and Recovery. The 5th step that the city could take is to conduct stormwater modeling to better understand the amount of stormwater that might be available for use and what it would take to treat that water so that it could be used. Next slide, please. So as Colin mentioned, the city has done quite a bit of work already in various aspects that it could also continue doing as it moves forward. For example, it could continue working and certainly plans to continue working with Sonoma Water on regional water supply resiliency efforts. The city has also been quite involved regionally on groundwater efforts. So continue working with the Groundwater Sustainability Agency on regional groundwater sustainability efforts. And finally, continued and perhaps even do some additional tracking on changes in regulations, technology, and funding opportunities to determine if changes in those areas warrant revisiting options in the future. I mentioned earlier in the presentation, there were certain supply options that did not advance past the screening step, and perhaps that they could be revisited in the future if there are changes in these 3 areas: regulations, technology, and funding. So I think that brings us to the end of this portion of the presentation. So Mark, if there are any questions, we'd love to take those now.
That'd be great. Thank you, Katie. Easter, I don't know if you see any hands up or if our audience.
Yes.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
Great.
We do have a hand raised by Terry. Terry, I will unmute you and we will pull up the slide here with the timer just momentarily. And then you can. Okay, you should be unmuted, Terry. Or you might. There you go.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now.
Yes.
So last month I attended the California Water Commission webinars that they put on also for public comment. And one of the many points that was brought out was that in the cities, in the state of California, cities use about 7 million acre feet of water in a year. And half of that goes to irrigating landscapes. So I guess my first question, I actually have 3 of them. My first question is the city of Santa Rosa considering increasing contracts with organizations such as Daily Acts to hold workshops and public events to help people learn how to increase the ability of their soils in their backyards, on their curbsides, on the front yards or side yards, to be able to infiltrate more rainwater and thereby help recharge groundwater? That would be my first question.
Okay, maybe Colin, would you like to respond to that?
Hi, Mark. Yes, thank you. And Terry, thank you. Really great question. So in terms of the amount of water used in Santa Rosa for landscapes, I think we're less than a third of our total annual use goes to landscapes. So we've had programs going on for quite a long time to help customers use less water in the landscape. So that's part of the good news. Additionally, we have programs to provide rebates to convert lawn to low water use. And we have technical expertise. So at no cost, folks can reach out to our water use efficiency team and we will do site visits, whether it's a business or a church, a school, a park, or a home. And our team can come out and help assess the landscape, the irrigation system, and make recommendations. And we have worked with Daily Acts before. They're a terrific organization, and they do great work. I don't know that we currently have a contract with them. I can talk to, so I see that Peter Martin, our
Yeah.
deputy director, is nodding his head. Peter, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, Colin, thanks. Yeah, we've been able to utilize Daily Acts to host several workshops. And it's been fantastic. And not only that, we've been utilizing Zoom where possible, but I think we've been finding some of the participation has waned coming out of the pandemic. So we're looking to start to bring some of those back in person, and Daily Acts has been a great partner in that regard, especially when it comes to things like, just like you mentioned, like mulching, lawn conversion, and creating a healthy landscape, low water landscape in folks' yards. So we see that as a great partnership, and I don't see it ending anytime soon. And we're always looking at ways to increase participation through workshops like that. So
I wanted to mention one more thing if I could, and that is, as we move forward, one of the key elements of this water supply alternatives plan focuses on converting large ornamental landscapes, particularly at commercial sites, and giving a high enough rebate that the business case for converting that to low water use becomes more compelling. It can be very expensive on a very large landscape to convert it. There's completely different type of irrigation equipment. It's all of the material needing to be mulched into the ground and then the new material brought in. And so for businesses that are interested, the current rebate isn't quite enough to help make that business case. But with this part of what's in this plan is very aggressive technical assistance and rebate assistance to help particularly with the business, although the rebate will also be available to the homeowners as well. We find the businesses have the biggest challenge in being able to move forward with those projects. So terrific questions. Katie, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think, Colin, you mentioned this at the beginning of your presentation, but just the phenomenal job that customers and residences in Santa Rosa have done on conservation. And I think it's always the question that we get asked at these community meetings. So it's pretty cool to see that continued.
Great,
And
thanks.
Terry, I think you had one or two more questions. Let's see if we can't squeeze those in as well.
All right, thank you so much for your answer. And my second question is, have you or has someone in Santa Rosa contacted Brad Lancaster in the city of Tucson, Arizona, and the work that they're doing in curb cuts to funnel water that would be running off the streets into curbsides?
Yeah, we are aware of his work, and it's very impressive, and staff have attended workshops and are in contact with him. I don't know at this time if we have any formal programs, but we do have requirements for new development that it's called low impact development, specifically so that any stormwater that hits that property is supposed to stay on that property. So they need to find ways to slow it and sink that water into the ground rather than have it run off to gutters. So yes, Brad Lancaster's work is terrific and we're aware of it. And I don't know at this point if there has been any specific code change that have been made based on that, but he's very inspirational and the water use efficiency team is very aware of his work.
Great, thank you, Colin. And Terry, you had one more question, yes?
Yeah, and it had to do with actually what was just said about requiring new, having new regulations for new building where the water stays on the site. That was one of my last questions. And then also about the suburbs around, the land around, do you have anyone helping larger landowners understand how to improve the quality of their soil to be able to infiltrate more rainwater?
Okay, and Colin, you want to address that? And then we'll see if we have any other commenters.
Yeah, so our programs can fund working directly with folks within our city jurisdiction. So we can work with our ratepayers because they've paid for those services. So we don't have programs that go beyond the city boundary, but we do workshops on low water use landscapes, and we also work with the master gardeners on healthy soils and soil improvement. We also contract with Daily Access, Deputy Director Martin talked about. So yes, there's quite a bit of work going on with that. I would also encourage you, Terry, if you're interested and you feel comfortable reaching out to the water use efficiency team to learn more, because I'm probably not doing them as much justice as I should be with the work that they're doing. If that is of interest to you, you can call their hotline, and that number is 707-543-3985. You can also simply Google Santa Rosa water use efficiency or Santa Rosa Water Smart, and their webpage should pop up a link to it should pop up pretty easily. But terrific questions. Really appreciate it, Terry. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Easter, want to get back to you to see if we have any other hands up.
Yes, we do not have any other hands raised at this time.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And Colin, Katie, what's our next step here?
Sorry about that. I think it comes over to me. Yeah, Katie?
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Katie. So what we wanted to do is tell you our project timeline, where we're headed from here, and if you had additional comments that you wanted, there are a couple of places, a couple ways that you can share additional comments if you wanted to. So this shows where we've been and where we're headed. You can see that we've had quite a few meetings with our water team, our stakeholder group, our board of public utilities. That board is a City of Santa Rosa board that is in our charter for our city. So it's a charter designated board, and they oversee the water department. We also have a city council. So we're going to be talking to them about this project, and then show you when those meetings will occur. We're going to be talking with the Board of Public Utilities about this draft plan on October 5th. We'll talk to the City Council about the draft plan on September 26th. Oh, I'm sorry. September, we're talking to the council about the study and the portfolios. And then we'll give them more detail about the plan in October. My apologies, I got that a little backwards. You can also go to our webpage. We'll be posting additional information. And when we have a public review draft of the plan that will get posted. So probably by the first day of October, we should probably have that draft plan posted. You can send an email to our team at waterresources@srcity.org, or you can mail us letters at the address shown on the screen. The contact information is also on the web page. So if that's easier, you're welcome to go to that web page to get that contact information. And the meeting information is on that web page as well. We have reminders about those upcoming meetings. The public meetings we've had in the past with you, our community, and with our Board of Public Utilities were taped. The tape, the recording, and the PowerPoint slides are available on our webpage as well. So there's a lot of good information there for folks who might be interested. So again, we're back to having time for questions and comments. So let me turn it over to Easter.
Yes, thank you. We do have a hand raised from Karen. I will unmute you, and you should have the ability to make a comment.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So who is actually, or what group of people is actually going to decide which of those portfolios becomes what happens? For instance, I think I like portfolio 2 in this, in the amount of water that is available with that and the cost, but really the alternative portfolio 4 looks like the optimal option, you know, from my perspective.
Colin, do you want to address that?
Yeah, thank you. I'll be happy to. So Karen, that's a great question. What the plan will lay out is that these are options that can move forward. So if the Board of Public Utilities and then if the City Council are comfortable and accept the plan, then the water team will begin some of the studies that were outlined and begin a couple of steps that all of the portfolios outline. So looking at our water use efficiency programs, doing those very aggressive rebates for turf, and also doing additional programs for toilet replacement. We've been able to do fully funded toilet replacements for our residents with 2 different grants. And we'd like to make that a regular program that isn't grant dependent, but is always in place, so that we can have a professional plumber remove and replace toilets across the city with super high efficiency toilets. So that can start to move forward, the planning, the figuring out the funding, staffing up for that. And then the converting our existing emergency wells, we have 4. That would begin with going to our Board of Public Utilities and getting their buy-in on having those move forward as capital projects. And that would be part of our normal budget process. So we'd want to make sure that we have the funds to do that, that we get the design, and that we bid those projects, and that we move forward in a way so that we're within our rate structure and within our funding that we have for these kinds of projects. And then some of those studies show up in more than one. So again, if we wanted to do studies, what we would be looking at is, again, going to the Board of Public Utilities and reminding them of the work that has been done with this plan, and looking at what we're seeing with what we know about well sites today. We've done some studies in the past. What we need to better understand about aquifer storage and recovery and keeping the groundwater basin in balance. And so advancing studies that would let us look at how do we best move forward with potentially adding brand new wells in a way that would be sustainable. And again, looking at funding opportunities, looking at potentially state or federal grant money that could help us with those capital projects to relieve the burden on our ratepayers as much as possible. So the decision-making would be partly staff bringing recommendations forward step by step based on what we see in the plan, what we see with changes in technology and funding and regulations, and our board discussing this with us and helping us as the policymakers and the folks who are the approvers of our budget to make sure that they agree that the path we're moving forward makes sense. So it's, in some ways, it isn't that we have to necessarily pick one portfolio, but rather that we remind ourselves that we're in an adaptive process and we have a goal we're trying to achieve and a target we want to achieve. We only need a certain amount of water. Some of these could produce much more water than we need. But we may find that groundwater wells, new sites aren't as productive as we would hope. Maybe they're not as cost effective as we hope. Maybe we're unable to do new wells with aquifer storage and recovery. We have to make sure we're not taking more water out of the basin than we're putting back in. So if we have trouble with groundwater, then the next steps would be really studying and looking at these other options. And again, with this kind of a document that doesn't tell us what we must do, it tells us what we could do and what those potential decision points would have as ramifications. And we do updated studies at the time to really drill into very deep studies about perhaps recycled water being purified for drinking water, or stormwater being captured and used for aquifer storage and recovery. Those studies would move forward to then assess how do we best decide what to do. So all those decision points, and those are decision points primarily that would be in the hands of our Board of Public Utilities. But again, staff would be making recommendations and asking the board for direction and making sure that we're working with the board on the funding and the budgeting for these so that they're done in a reasonable and systematic way that works with our regular budgeting process. And also, of course, seeking other forms of funding and that sort of thing. Peter, is there anything you would want to add to that in terms of, from a deputy director position, sort of what our approach might be?
No, not this time. Yeah, I think we've got our work cut out ahead of us to start to evaluate these proposals. Hopefully once we've concluded the work here. So
Terrific, thanks.
Great. I hope that answered your question, Karen. Did you have anything else you'd like to ask?
No, that was very thorough. Thank you.
Terrific,
Great.
thanks. It was a great question. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Easter, do we have any other hands up at this time?
We do not have any other hands raised.
All right. And with that, Colin or Peter, do you have any closing comments you'd like to make?
Well, I'll just say and then I'll hand it over to Peter, but as the project manager for this, I so appreciate that the public is interested and has thoughts and questions and suggestions. It's been really important to us. As water purveyors and water planners, we only know what we know, which is a lot about water and water supply and operating a water system. But our public, our community, our customers know a lot as well. So the fact that people are taking time to listen and to watch these videos, to participate, it really means a lot to us. Our stakeholder group as well was very engaged and really appreciate all of the time and energy they put into this as well. It really is our water future, and Santa Rosa is very committed to working with our community to make sure that we're as prepared as possible for the future. And I don't know, Peter, if there's anything you'd like to add.
no, I definitely, Colin, you covered everything. Just appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy lives to hear about this important project, and really just focusing on creating a roadmap for dealing with the challenges that may be coming in the next 20, 30, 40 years. This is a critical point, even though we have some time before we project full build out of the city. But I think we understand, having gone through these last few droughts, that we need to look at other opportunities that may come up in the next few years, and it's gonna take some time to evaluate these things and find the right fit. So
Great. Well, thank you very much. I want to take a moment to thank our panelists and our speakers from tonight, and want to thank all of you who were listening and taking the time, as Colin said, to listen and learn more about the different aspects of our water future. Just a quick reminder that a recording of this meeting and the presentation slides will be posted on the project website, and that's at, as noted here on the site, srcity.org/ourwaterfuture. And on behalf of the City of Santa Rosa, I'd like to thank all the members of the public who joined us, and all the panelists, the interpreters, and the host for participating tonight. We appreciate you taking the time to listen to the presentations and provide your input on Santa Rosa's water future. Again, thank you very much. Appreciate it.